Did you know Rohan is supposed to be around 52,000 square miles in size? Or 136,000 square kilometers if we're using civilized measurements. That makes it slightly larger than England. Not the whole of the UK, just the part of the country where lots of people are descended from, but nobody actually claims it. And yeah, I didn't do the maths for that, we can thank Karen Wynne Fonstad for that. If you look at a map of Rohan, you'll see some names of rivers, towns, regions, but it doesn't tell you a whole lot. So in this video, let's take a look at Rohan's regions, what they look like, and who lives there. Rohan was once known as Calanadon, an outer province of Gondor. It's lush, green, sea of grass with fertile pastures and fields and valleys with lots of streams and hidden pools. The climate is mild, warm enough in summers, and rarely being covered by snow in the winter. Yet despite a great environment and climate, Calanadon was never home to that many Gondorians, and that number only dropped as Gondor weakened, and events such as the Great Plague ripped through the province on its way north. Eventually, following the Battle of the Field of Celebrant, Steward Kirion gifts the land of Calanadon to Eorl the Young, Lord of the Aethiod, and they rename the land Rohan and become known as the Rohirrim. They settle far and wide across the country, in some places more than others, and the large land, the size of England I reiterate, gets divided into 7 named subregions. These regions are the Fold, the Westfold, the Eastfold, the West Eminent, the East Eminent, the West March, and the Wold. As you can see, the Rohirrim were rather simplistic with their naming process. Let's start with the Wold. If you look at a map of Rohan, the Wold will immediately stand out. It's the second largest region, but the most northerly. It mostly consists of grassy uplands, hilly and treeless, but despite its size, the Wold is actually the least populous of Rohan's regions. This is for 2 main reasons. When the Rohirrim first settled Rohan, the Wold was still contested by the Balkoth Easterlings, and Eorl the Young actually fell in battle there 30 years after Rohan's founding. Years later, the Wold would continuously come under threat from Easterlings or Orcs from across the Anduin, so living in the Wold meant there was a higher risk of untimely death. The second reason is that the rocky uplands don't make for the most fertile of farmland, especially compared to the other regions of Rohan. As a result, the Wold seems to only be home to semi-nomadic herdsmen and shepherds, who usually remained in the region all season long. I mentioned the Wold as the second largest region, so let's go to the largest region, the East Eminent. The East Eminent is a geographically diverse region. The eastern part is dominated by the East Wall, a branch of the Emyn Muil, which extends beyond the Anduin. This was a common staging point for Orc raids into Rohan. The centre of the region is typical Rohan, fertile grasslands. The southern and western East Eminent is bordered by the river Entwash. In the west, it dips into a deep, fertile valley, but in the south it drops into a marshland delta known as the Mouths of Entwash. Despite being far more hospitable than the Wold, there are a few fixed settlements in the East Eminent, and like the Wold, it is mostly home to semi-nomadic herdsmen. The exact reason for this is unknown, but I would wager that it has something to do with Orc raids that came down from the East Wall. In the spirit of large, boring regions, let's move to the West Eminent. Of Rohan's regions, we actually know the least about the West Eminent, as it rarely gets mentioned. We know that the ground is less firm than it is in the East Eminent, and that the grass can grow tall enough to reach the knees of mounted riders, and that the grass hides many treacherous bogs. One interesting tidbit about the West Eminent is that during the reign of several Rohirric kings, the Dunlendings would filter across the Eisen into the West Eminent, creating settlements in the eaves of Fangorn. Much like the Wold and the East Eminent, it can be assumed that not many people live in the West Eminent, possibly because of the Dunlending threat, and that of Orcs raining down from the Misty Mountains. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. If people don't live in most of Rohan, then where do they live? And now I shall answer your question. For the next largest region is the Eastfold, bordered by the Mering Stream, the Entwash, the White Mountains, and the Fold. Here, the land rises from the grasslands of the East Eminent into the foothills of the White Mountains, and in the hills and valleys of these mountains live most of the Eastfold's population, which is actually a significant chunk of Rohan's population. Protected on all sides by natural barriers, and insulated by Gondor to the east, the Eastfold is almost certainly one of the safest places to live in Rohan, and as a result, during the War of the Ring, many of the folk of the East Eminent and the Wold are evacuated here by Eomer. Also within the Eastfold is half of the Firion-Holt, a woodland which was renowned for the size of its wild boars. The next largest region is the infamous West March, wedged between the arms of the Adorn and the Eisen. I say infamous because the West March has a checkered history. It's technically part of Rohan, as gifted by Steward Kirion, but in actuality its loyalties are dubious at best. Due to the close proximity of Dunland, the Rohirrim who settled in the region quickly became of mixed blood, and the region became the centerpiece of several disputes between the Rohirrim and the Dunlendings, most notably between King Helm Hammerhand and the Rohirrim Dunlending lord Freka. In the reign of King Folkwyne, Theoden's great-grandfather, the region was properly conquered back, but by the time of the War of the Ring, the region once again had dubious loyalties, and many of the people here ultimately sided with Saruman. Of course, when the tensions between the Dunlendings and the Rohirrim boiled over, the region of the Westfold was the one that suffered most. The Westfold is much like the Eastfold, grassy uplands with many fertile valleys, of which the Deeping Combe and the location of Helm's Deep is the most famous. And like in the Eastfold, these valleys are densely populated by the Rohirrim, resulting in the Westfold being Rohan's second or third most populous region, despite its small size. Although the southern border of the Westfold is clearly the White Mountains, the northern border doesn't seem to be well defined, but it might be the King's Road, also known as the Great North-South Road. As I said earlier, the Westfold was no stranger to war, and as a result the people developed a more martial culture, basing their capital out of Helm's Deep, with a strong focus on defending the fords of Isen. Last, but certainly not least, we have the Fold. And yes, I know, what a creative name, but it is spelt with an E. Much like the Westfold and the Eastfold, the Fold is mostly hilly grasslands and deep valleys in the feet of the mountains, with the large hill of which upon Edoras is built dominating the open grassland beneath the foothills. The Fold is by far the smallest of Rohan's regions, and its eastern border, bereft of natural barriers, is defined by a line that runs southwest of the junction of the Snowbourn and the Entwash. Despite its size, it seems to be the most populous region, containing the cities of Edoras and Aldburg, the named villages of Underharrow and Upbourne, and the hidden refuge of Dunharrow in the White Mountains. Basically, if Rohan is England, then the Fold is London. These 7 regions make up Rohan. All of them are different, and each has their own place in history, except for the West Eminent, which is boring. I was mostly inspired to do this video by stumbling across an old question on Lord of the Rings from a person who had only watched the films, and was wondering why Rohan was so empty. Now of course, Peter Jackson's films have some interesting geographical quirks going on, but in terms of Rohan being empty, yeah, it's not exactly incorrect. Despite being the size of England, most of Rohan's population lives in a narrow strip along the foothills of the White Mountains, and the vast grassy plains are mostly empty of people. This is why Aragorn and company were able to cross much of Rohan, only running into Éomer and his company, who were there for the same reasons as them. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. I'm just glad it's a short video for once, but it was neat to do, easy to make, and I actually enjoyed it. I'll probably do another video on other regions in the future, such as Gondor or Rivanion, and we can go old school and back to Beleriand too. So many video ideas, so little time, and not enough Gondorians when the Westfold fell. Thanks again, farewell, and remember, be a hipster, break the mold, live in the wold.